great to see everybody here after 2 years of lockdown and COVID. And it's nice to be able to get to see old friends and colleagues again.
Doesn't it?
If we all jump to the lifeboats, it's okay.
So, firstly,
We are working our way.
That's another sort of energy sustainable technology that sort of is great but works against us. It also burns the grass in my yard.
Want to touch upon a subject and a topic which is not talked a lot yet, and that is compliance. And compliance is something which is the basis for assurance. We are all talking about several aspects of design, of research, where we are learning things, we are understanding how to get better fire safety. But at the end of it, it is the assurance or the assessment of conformity of products that actually go on the site. I'm lucky to be in the industry of conformity assessment and compliance across many products, electrical, switchgear, you name it. And I must say that I feel sad that the building and construction industry, which sits on a risk of fire safety or fire hazards, has very less importance given to assurance mechanisms that are at this time worldwide as well as here. Any product around you, the mobile phones, these electrical products that you see around, have such a high degree of compliance requirements and regulations across the world. Anything which has Bluetooth, for example, as one of so many things, has to undergo so many tests for radio frequency compliance across every country. Whereas when we have building materials, which are potentially very, very combustible, Professor talked about the fact about how we love plastics and how much combustible material we have around us. We really need to comprehend how compliance mechanisms need to be put in place and come into practice, not necessarily always through a government mechanism, but all of us who need or want fire safety should comprehend it. So I'm going to start with a very simple but an important point. I think the audience can guess which one of the two individuals is an architect and which one of two is an engineer, right? So a lot happens on the drawing board, a lot happens when it comes to the architect and the engineer doing tug of war, if I can say, before the contractor gets the order and say, here you go. And the contractor says, well, I'm already behind 5 months because you two were fighting of what looks good or not. And this is the unfortunate reality that at the construction site, the situation is often very, very different. And it is here that an intervention is very, very critical. People need to know and understand what was designed, what is coming on the site is probably very different. So I'm going to touch upon the fire tests and the mechanisms for facade fire safety, but drive towards a very important point about compliance and how compliance mechanisms exist. They are very, very evolved across various products, and now several countries have started adopting them in a very clear, impartial way, and these are available and accessible for governments, authorities having jurisdictions, or just entities who would say, well, this is what we need in our specifications. And I'm going to try and make it simple. Materials burn. Professor was talking about it. We all know, we all have been seeing. And there are people who have innovative ways to evaluate, maybe with a blowtorch saying, oh, this is going to burn. But how do we really make it very easy? We have the European norm, the Euro classes. Some of you would be familiar with this. And I can tell you it can get a little complicated when we are trying to understand what is A1, A2, B, S, D, and how various materials need to be viewed through so many lenses, so many test methods that you see on the table below to say, well, this is so-and-so class. And I want to talk about just 4 properties, which is basic, simple. Ignitability, we understand how and when something will catch fire. Combustibility, calorific value, flame spread. So these 4 properties are fairly well understood. And one of my favorite examples is one of the most important things to evaluate in any building material is calorific value. And all of us who are health freaks understands calories very, very well. We will look at them while we are having lunch or so. And this is a clue. How much calorific value does a material have? And if any of you have these 4 things figured out and understood that what are these 4 properties of any building material that is going in the cladding, well, half of the battle is won, because now you are equipped to understand that when you are designing a system, a cladding system which unfortunately could have hundreds of drawings, which of those drawings, which of those adjacencies can have a buildup of materials with high combustibility or high calorific value adjacent with a low ignition temperature. And it's very basic logic. Imagine what is potentially the most risky buildup of materials, and from there evaluate calorific value versus ignitability. What is the adjacency? This is pure simple. All of this, unfortunately, is explained via very complicated nomenclature. And I'm happy to say that we have registered a CPD with RIBA to talk in great detail about how to link ignitability and all of these in very simple way to ensure that fire safety in facades is not as complicated as we have been probably making it. Any building envelope, we talked a lot about building envelope, it needs to also ensure compartmentalization, because the building envelope often ends up being the wall of the building exterior. In some parts, we need to make sure that it is able to contain the fire within the floor and doesn't go on the floor above. And there is a myriad of standards, so many different test methods to evaluate so many different components and systems. Here is a look at the European norm, or the EN standard, which talks about fire resistance of not just facades as a whole, but also something that can be used to evaluate components. And for people familiar with facades, people familiar with curtain wall systems would know and understand that a fire test is often a standalone event. Someone tested one system, one product, but on site and in reality, if you look at the product catalogs of various suppliers, it's a very long list of combinations that need to be evaluated, tested, and can become very, very complicated sometimes. If you look at the image on the bottom right, you can realize that just because of the topology and where all a fire can come to be, there are so many scenarios that exist. And hence, it is very, very demanding on anybody who is trying to evaluate the fire safety or the potential fire hazard in the design of the building envelope. But the good news is that a lot of this is already done. There are a very, very large number of material suppliers as well as other commercial entities who have done all of these tests. They know how products behave, and a lot of intelligence actually exists. And it could be coming from different forms. You could have an American test method evaluating the same thing. And I'm very keen and eager to see the result of the research that Professor talked about, comparing different test methods. And I could spend a day talking to all of you about how these different test methods operate, because we are lucky to be in Dubai. I represent a lab from Dubai, which is in the center of so many different test methods. We come from the construction industry. We say our construction industry is on drugs. People say we want to do it now. The building needs to be now. And probably that's why we are here more, because as a testing laboratory, if someone comes to us and says we want to test now, we are able to offer a test now, versus probably the situation in many parts of the world where access to testing laboratories is long wait time. So as a lab in Dubai, we conduct a very large number of tests as per American standards, British standards, European standards, Australian standards sometimes. And we get a very good view of, well, in intent, it's the same thing. You are trying to evaluate fire resistance of a perimeter fire barrier, whether you use an EN test method or an ASTM E2307, something that you can see on the screen here. This is the intermediate scale multi-story test apparatus, or ISMA, which is a test setup that can be used to evaluate fire resistance for perimeter fire barriers. Spandrels, one of the tests that Srinivas was mentioning about, but also the NFPA 285 test, which is the brother or cousin brother of the BS 8414. But as I was trying to explain, that different test methods, American, British, the result is the same. We are trying to evaluate the product's behavior. Whether it's as I mentioned, the NFPA 285 test for fire propagation, or the BS 8414 test, again, for fire propagation. And it is an endless debate about how one test could be better than the other test or not. But it is critical to understand two aspects. What is the result, and why are we doing the test? When we are doing material tests, we want to assess how the material behaves. And when we are assessing 100 different drawings of a cladding system, we want to make sure that the system design is correct. The choice of materials, the choice of adjacencies is correct. And of course, there is a big debate about the architect's dreams and engineer's nightmare, as Professor mentioned about, that there has to be a balance. If there is a need to innovate, if there is a need to differentiate the building exterior, then money needs to be spent to evaluate that it is different. Thank you, everyone.
Book your tickets now for the 8th International Tall Building High-Rise Fire Safety Conference, taking place alongside FDIC in Indianapolis, US, on the 15th to the 17th of April 2024. 3 days of world-class speaker presentations, debates and networking. Book your tickets via the website www.tallbuildingfiresafety.com. Early bird discount tickets will be available. The Tall and High-Rise Building Fire Safety Management course is ideal for anyone who has responsibility for fire safety management in tall and high-rise buildings. It is a 5-day intensive course with world-class instructors. You can get full details of the course on our website www.tallbuildingfiresafety.com.
But core of today's presentation is how people rely on test reports. Can I see hands of how many people have seen test reports? And you would typically believe that if there is a pass test report, that the product is good. And yes, the product is good, and the test report only establishes the capability of somebody to produce a material that can be tested. But a test report is not able to establish whether there is an assurance that exact same material will be on the site. And this is very, very important, something that people are probably not really looking very carefully about. When you see a pass test report, apart from a list of 50, 60 things that I would tell you that you must look, when was the test done, was it sampled, where was it done, what was the conditioning, because a test report rarely talks about how many times it failed in the past before that report was there. A test report may or may not even say how it was manufactured, whether it was sampled, whether someone witnessed the assembly of the product in the factory. And this is exactly where the traceability of the material becomes critical. Test report or test certificate? Anybody using the term test certificate? Anybody who would ask a question that, what is the validity of this test report? I get this question a lot. What is the validity of the test report? The validity of any test report, just the test report that you see, is exactly the same as a blood sugar test that you would do in the morning. What is the state now? Because it is a sample delivered in the lab. But what is getting manufactured in the factory on a recurring basis? Is it getting tested? And how that links up. And this is an extremely critical aspect. A lot of countries, a lot of regulatory regimes are realizing this and implementing laws for the construction industry. And mind you, for most of the other products which we consider risky, food, electrical appliances have a much more stringent regime already in place for decades probably now. So I want to talk about compliance and compliance mechanism, because when there is liability, when there is a need of assurance for something that could lead to an accident, that could lead to loss of life, that could lead to maybe a legal repercussion, a financial repercussion, what is the mechanism that you have in place to ensure things are being assured? And I'll take a quick example and talk about how very recently the UAE Fire and Life Safety Code has adopted some very simple mechanisms based on international practice. So they started off with revising the code and adding a chapter for roles and responsibilities. They added a section that any test method referred in the code has to be taken into account, that whenever the test method gets revised, the code need not be revised again. It is automatically adopting a newer, better version of the test method. But they don't stop here. They define a standard, which is 17065, a standard used to develop certification and listing programs, and I will come to that in a minute, as a minimum requirement. So any product that the civil defense or the authority having jurisdiction will allow on a project, which can potentially be dangerous, has to be certified by an independent third-party body. But not just that. The independent third-party body needs to be accredited and evaluated as per not just 17065, but they even go down to defining which certification mechanism as per the guide, which is type 5 as per guide 67, that it needs to do sampling before the test is done. What is the frequency when the factory needs to be audited And only then, when there is a established independent third-party certification body who is taking ownership of what material will come on the site, is when the mechanism of registration needs to be done, that who is the commercial entity who will supply the product. So there is a complete traceability of who all are the stakeholders involved in assurance of repeatability at the manufacturing location, who are the stakeholders who are delivering the product and taking on the responsibility. And I really would like to talk about certification and listing as a mechanism which is not only adopted in United States and so many other countries, but and for so many products, is a mechanism which is just a simple 4 or 5 step process. Before the test is conducted, there has to be someone who visits the manufacturing location and witnesses how the product is manufactured and creates a traceability of the sample, the test report, which becomes the basis of assurance. And not just that, it will also create a very high level of traceability, which means the product needs to carry a certification mark, a traceability number that can be tracked at the construction site. There is labeling on the product. If you look at your mobile phones, chargers, you will see up to 6 or 7 traceability numbers. You can look up on, for example, this projector here. It will have a traceability number, let's say under the CE mark, there'll be a 4-digit number. If you look up that number, it will tell you whether it was TUV or SGS or Intertek or whoever did the test of that product, in which laboratory, etc. And all of these traceability-led certification mechanisms are currently already available. Hundreds of manufacturers around the world who are selling products in regulated market like North America or so many others have these traceabilities, which means at the construction site, you can look up the information that where exactly is this product coming from? What is it tested to? Under what circumstances? Under which configuration? And if this is not checked, if this is not evaluated, then we are leaving compliance just on the table where the specifications were written and the contract was signed. Someone has to go at the construction site and close this process, because as a step 1, we know whether the material which is being used as cladding is combustible or not combustible, has high calorific value, what is the temperature? Yes, tests are done, we have certification and listing, there is traceability. There is the fire consultant or the facade fire consultant who can come in and evaluate that, yes, for this building, out of 500 drawings, these 15 combinations are potentially risky. Do we have evidence that they have been tested in these combinations, in these adjacencies, using any large-scale fire test, whether it's a BS 8414 or any other? But there is some level of assurance mechanism that exists. But then what? What is the next step? You have this assurance, great. What is happening on the construction site? Who is evaluating that at the construction site, we are not in a situation which is potentially risky? And I want to tell you that this mechanism already exists. There are codes which mandate this compliance, and I want to very quickly show you a video that this is an aluminum composite panel headed for the construction site, at the construction site. You look at the back, you see the traceability number. The traceability number can be looked up on the certification directory. When you click open the certification directory, you can see what is the traceability of the product. What was it tested to? What test methods? What configuration? All of that data actually is available right now. And we just need to connect the dots and make sure the whole process is in place. So I'll quickly summarize. This is a 3-point mechanism which is also forms the basis of the UAE Fire and Life Safety Code. is that the first step, which could be entrusted as a responsibility to either the fire consultant or the facade specialist or the contractor, this is completely up to the mechanism that you want to look at, contractual or legal. And make sure that these people are taking the responsibility of specifying or getting the right material in place, whether it's tested, certified, listed. The subcontractor, contractor, someone takes up the assurance of having a large-scale fire test done to say out of the 500 risky scenarios, the 3 risky scenarios were tested and evaluated, and have someone close the loop. Inspect the system, make sure that the inspection is done, and have maybe a legally binding, contractually, commercially, whatever linkage the contract needs to have. But there needs to be a motivation to make sure these steps are followed. And it's very clear. There are internationally published guidelines. The standards exist that we do not need to say only this commercial entity or that commercial entity is allowed to do these tests. The ISO standards are adopted across jurisdictions, by countries, by governments, to make it a level playing field everywhere. And just as a concluding slide, I must add this, because this is quite a debate, that why are we asked to do the tests again and again? Why should we do another test? Why should we spend so much money? Well, if you don't want to spend the money, build the same thing that you built last time and prove it. It's very simple. If you need to innovate, if you want to differentiate and say my building should look a class apart, then you have to spend the money. If you are getting a customized car built, which some people do, and there are some automotive suppliers who build a car as per you, then you pay as per it, or you buy something which is assembly line. So that's it. That's the last slide. Question and answers are happening later. I hope I've saved up some time, or as Russ says, maybe 1 or 2 minutes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Science and added.
Book your tickets now for the 8th International Tall Building High-Rise Fire Safety Conference, taking place alongside FDIC in Indianapolis, US, on the 15th to the 17th of April 2024. 3 days of world-class speaker presentations, debates and networking. Book your tickets via the website www.tallbuildingfiresafety.com. Early bird discount tickets will be available. The Tall and High-Rise Building Fire Safety Management course is ideal for anyone who has responsibility for fire safety management in tall and high-rise buildings. It is a 5-day intensive course with world-class instructors. You can get full details of the course on our website www.tallbuildingfiresafety.com.